Hygiene. Now, I've touched upon it lightly before, but make no mistake that there's a reason that people died very young in the ancient days. It was considered a miracle if you even lived to old age by how we define it now. And the reason that they kept dying young is that they've misunderstood the world and many of the processes by which you can actually get sick and die, such as not having proper hygiene. For example, you might know about the legendary and infamous Roman bathing houses. These were structures for Romans to bathe in a communal fashion. For the commoners of Rome, they had to go to a public bathhouse to bathe amongst each other. It's not really hard to imagine all the things that could go wrong with such a practice. Not that ancient Rome really cared. They thought it was such a great idea that they constructed massive bathhouses to hold more people and even made them very artistic. However, as you may have also guessed, these bathhouses were not exactly the cleanest things around. With so many people in them, they would have needed to change the water quite a bit to keep them clean, but it turns out they probably didn't do that all so much. So in those waters, you'd find anything from dirt to oil, things like mildews and bacterias, and even literal feces.
Okay, I'll give you that most likely the sort of hygiene or hygienic conditions of Roman baths wouldn't really be up to standard in our modern time, but saying that that's because they didn't have an overall understanding of the concept of transmission of diseases is wrong. It's more of a problem of administrative nature. So yeah, they didn't really bother to change the water or clean them as much as they should have, but if we read the sources, we see that they very much know that that could be a dangerous situation when it comes to a possible contagious event. Let's read it. Celsus, for example, writes that the worst thing you can do when you have a wound that hasn't completely healed yet is to go to the Roman baths, because it would render the wound wet and dirty, which can make it rot. This author also tells us that as he's teaching us how to take care of several possible conditions, whether it be wounds, whether it be all sorts of problems, he tells us how to do your bandages right, and he says if you do it right, then you don't have to worry about those becoming loose when you go to the bath. Also, as we read the Historia Augusta, we see that Emperor Claudius was worried about sick individuals going to the Roman baths, and even institutes regulations and laws whereby people who were sick were only allowed to go to the bath in certain specific time frames in order to keep them separated from the rest of the population.
Gladiatrix. There aren't even records of them being trained in gladiator combat, which might have meant that they were literally thrown in to die without even an attempt to give them a chance at survival. The reason this is both creepy and sad is that there have been plenty of female warriors throughout history, and women have proven to be just as strong, if not stronger, than men when allowed the chance to prove themselves.
Okay, this statement is, I don't know, some sort of fan service. Is that what your subscribers want to hear? I don't know. But this idea of women are stronger than men in combat, and basically it's the patriarchy that didn't allow them to fight. Well, first of all, let's be honest about this. What sort of combat are we talking about? Because if we're talking about armed combat, so if you give a man a sword and you give a woman a sword and they're both relatively trained, then weapons are great equalizers. But when we look in general, and particularly in the classical period, there is a reason why it was mostly meant to go to war, and that is because in general men tend to be larger and stronger and also more aggressive than women. But I'm not gonna go into the details because I already have a dedicated video, link in the description. I'm just saying the statement on its own sounds like a form of pandering, really.
The death of slaves. Crucifixion. While many may think that this was reserved for certain kinds of criminals, for slaves it was done for almost any reason that you could imagine. If they had committed any kind of crime, or even a perceived crime, they would be put to the cross, and yet it was done virtually all the time.
When it comes to crucifixion, it's absolutely not true that the Romans would just use it. You know, if you were a slave, or they would just crucify you for nothing. That is absolutely not true. The sources say that yes, crucifixion was used against non-citizen, but for two specific types of criminals: rebels and bandits. So no, they weren't just crucifying any slave they wanted.